Hello, my name's Andrew Bahari, and I'm a deacon at the Coptic Orthodox Church. And last night, while I was trying to shave my bald head, I used a brand new fresh blade, and as a result, I ended up sustaining a couple battle injuries here. We have this right here, we got this going on over here. But such is the price of war, such is the price of battle. And that's so fitting, because what we'll be talking about in this video is battle. We're going to be talking about how we're going to be making America Orthodox. I wish I could say Orthodox again. It sounds a little bit catchier, but America's never been Orthodox before. And one of my favorite war authors, his name is Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu was a guy who wrote about war thousands of years ago in China. And he has this pretty famous line in his book called The Art of War. I'm going to paraphrase it here. He says, "If you don't know yourself and you don't know your enemy, you're cooked. You're going to lose your battles." He says, if you know yourself, but not your enemy, you might win one here or there. You might not. If you know your enemy and you don't know yourself, likewise, you might win some, you might lose some. But, he says, if you know yourself and you know your enemy, you may not fear the result of 1,000 battles. And so that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be discussing the state of America, the zeitgeist, the culture. And we're going to be discussing the state of Orthodoxy and the Orthodox churches and what's going on in our churches. We're going to be discussing what advantages we have given the current climate, what disadvantages we have in the current climate, and the action plan moving forward. So, first things first, what is one of the biggest advantages Orthodoxy has in America for making America Orthodox? And one of the biggest advantages we have is that there is this overall disenchantment with liberalism in much of American Christianity. I've seen it myself. I'd be driving around and I'll sometimes see some churches that have pride flags in front of them. This happens. And a lot of Christian denominations in the past few decades have lost a significant portion of their congregation. And there's been a significant portion of Americans who don't affiliate with Christianity as much as was the case just a few decades ago. And so there's this disillusionment with the status quo of American Christianity. And here is where Orthodoxy might be able to come in and scoop up some of those people. Additionally, there is this existential crisis that is occurring in Americans as a result of the consumer culture. Culture has become so shallow. People used to identify with their religion. People used to identify with their heritage. People used to identify with their country and their patriotism. But nowadays, people are identifying with their favorite soccer team, or they're identifying with their favorite brands or musicians, things that are part of consumer culture. And this has created an existential crisis that I think really started to bubble up after the pandemic. Because before the pandemic, despite the fact that there was this existential crisis and angst going on in a lot of Americans, you still had enough activity in their lives that allowed them to distract themselves from that existential dread, that existential angst. But when everyone was forced to become isolated, people finally had to confront the elephant in the room. They finally had to look in the mirror and say, oh my, something ain't right. I got to actually get this figured out. And people had time to reflect and contemplate. And this led to an increase in converts to Orthodoxy anyway. And COVID just unmasked what was already there. It just unmasked the existential crisis that has been boiling up for decades now as a result with our obsession with consuming new product, new music, new film, new whatever, new shoes, new car all the time. It's not fulfilling. A third advantage Orthodoxy has in this cultural battle is it has a masculine aesthetic. I have to be careful here because Orthodoxy isn't inherently masculine or something like this. It's very balanced. It has, there's a place in Orthodoxy for men, and there's a place in Orthodoxy, of course, for women, and they're complementary, and there's no tension in one way or another. But if you compare that to the more feminine skews that have occurred in other Christian denominations in America, this balance, this reorientation back to baseline is rather attractive, especially to young men. Orthodoxy, we have a hierarchy with a pope and bishops and priests and clergy. And we have structure, clear structure. And there's a greater emphasis placed on asceticism, things like a disciplined prayer routine, things like fasting. These things aren't convenient because a lot of the mainstream Christianity in America is trying to make things more and more convenient. They're kind of playing into that consumer culture. But Orthodoxy is like, nah, you're fasting and it's not going to be fun or convenient. But that's what we have. That's Orthodoxy. And we pray, and our liturgies are sometimes 3 hours long, and we're standing up the whole time. And you're going to suck it up and you're going to do it. And we have prostration. So this has a strong appeal to young men who, where they go everywhere else, it's a bit more placating to convenience and trying to make people feel comfortable. Men don't want to feel comfortable in general. It's not the masculine essence. Men want to compete. Men want to defeat. Men want to conquer. And if you place them in a spiritual battle and present it as a spiritual battle, because it really is a spiritual battle, then that's going to appeal a bit more to the masculine spirit. Let me get the sip of coffee here. Another advantage we have now in America is the internet. The internet now is very different than the internet was even just 10 years ago, and obviously very different than before the days where there was no internet. That wasn't that long ago, It wasn't really that long ago. And the internet has made it so Orthodoxy is a lot more accessible. A lot more people can hear about it. A lot more people can know about it. A lot more people can study it. And there's really dense doctrinal and theological and apologetic channels like Daniel Kakish's channel called The Lines Then, or Agin's Apostolic Orthodoxy. We're more visible and we have more resources available to people than we ever have before. So this is another huge advantage, and these compromise the 5 big advantages that Orthodoxy has in the cultural battle in America. Now, what are some of the disadvantages? And there's quite a few of these too. The first big disadvantage is that Orthodoxy in America still till this day has a very strong ethnic encapsulation, where Oriental Orthodoxy, the Coptic Church in particular, it has doubled in the last decade. Since 2010, we have seen a doubling in our congregation. And is that because we're just that good at evangelism? We're hitting 3-point shots in evangelism? No, that's not why. The reason why Coptic Orthodoxy has grown so much in America in the past decade is because of immigration. There's been an influx of immigrants from primarily Egypt, if we're talking about the Coptic Church, to America, and this has caused a massive population growth within the Coptic Church. There's some problems that come with that. For one, it can obviously be alienating to converts. If you're a convert and you're not Egyptian and you walk into a church and everyone's Egyptian, you're not Egyptian, you might not feel like you belong. It's a real problem. And ideally, I would say, oh, all that matters is truth. All that matters is doctrine. And fundamentally, ideally, that's true. Obviously, that's true. But practically, people want to feel like they fit in. People want to feel like they belong. They don't want to feel like outsiders when they come to a new church. And this ethnic composition isn't only alienating to converts or potential converts, it's also alienating to second generation, third generation children of immigrants, like myself. I'm born in America. And even I, being an ethnic Egyptian, if I walk into a church and there's too much emphasis on Egyptian culture and the homeland and the motherland and all of this, and certain mannerisms that I didn't grow up with, even I feel a little bit out of place. I'm trying to play spirit walker and walk between these two worlds, and I try my best, and I use as much of my broken Arabic as I can. But there is a culture gap if a certain environment is really densely populated with immigrants from Egypt. And so this creates an issue. Now, the second problem is that if you have these churches that are densely populated with immigrants, they're not going to want to lose that identity. They do have generally a patriotism to their homeland. They do have a patriotism to their cultures. And now that they find themselves in this new Western culture, they might find it a little bit more difficult to make friends and to find things in common with people who are native to the country. And so what tends to happen is they start to kind of exist in a bubble amongst themselves. They associate with themselves, they become friends with each other, and they kind of cocoon. They cocoon amongst one another. And this obviously creates a situation where if you're creating a bubble around yourselves, that creates a barrier between people who are coming in. And they might feel threatened if you come in and you say, hey, we actually need to be a little bit more accommodating to people who might want to join the church, who might not have the same ethnic background. They might feel like, but we like our ethnic background, we like our heritage, we like our language. Don't take that away from us. That's a problem. Third disadvantage that we're going to have to deal with and figure out in making America Orthodox is, I actually already covered this. Here on my list, it says immigration-driven growth is not evangelism. We already said that. Now, the fourth disadvantage is that there is a little bit of a lack of infrastructure for converts. What do I mean by this? There's not an official catechesis. Now, there have been catecheses written. I think Father Tedros Malti has a catechism. But the catechisms, we need to have a more standardized catechism that is something that is very colloquial in its usage of English and something that is written to be given to somebody from the Western perspective. Right? It can't just be a translation of an Arabic catechesis. It has to be something that is relatable and accessible to someone who is converting, a Western convert. And also, we don't have a lot of priests who are not ethnic in Orthodoxy in America. There's this priest I know in the UK, there's this Coptic priest, his name is Father Peter Farrington, who is a native Brit. And it would be good to have more of those. And it would be good to have more native-born priests, even if they are ethnically Ethiopian or Armenian or Egyptian or whatever. And that's happening, not more and more now. We're seeing priests who were born in America join the priesthood. And that's good. And if we can keep doing that while also bringing in new clergy members who are not part of the primary ethnic groups, we would be doing a good thing in making the church more accommodating to people who might want to convert. And the fifth disadvantage is really more of a risk than it is a disadvantage. And it's the risk of diluting orthodoxy or diluting our tradition or compromising on it. And there's a specific church that comes to mind and a specific priest that comes to mind, and I'm not going to name any names, and if you know, you know. But I've seen it happen where sometimes an Orthodox church might start to lose the architecture. It'll look more like a contemporary building than a traditional Orthodox church. We don't like that. The priest might purposefully try to shave his beard to be really, really thin so he looks more contemporary and hip and cool and modern. And there might be uh, contemporary songs sung from the pulpit and guitar. No, all of this stuff is compromise. And this is an inherent danger we have when trying to evangelize. We want to evangelize, but we also want to keep the traditions and the heritage. And if you think about it, it's those traditions, it is orthodoxy that, one, of course, if we adhere to, prevents the risk of heresy. So there's that. But then on top of that, since, like I said earlier in the video, there is this disenfranchisement with the liberalism often found in a lot of the other Christian denominations, our tradition is actually what makes us stick out. It's what makes us appealing. You know, there's this funny clip from this one episode. I think it was Family Guy or South Park, one of those. I don't remember. The one with Hank. I don't watch these things. The one that has Hank in it. And they have this little scene where there's this Christian band and they're taking this kind of contemporary rock style of music and they're fitting it to be Christian or have Christian lyrics. And one of the characters in the show says, "You're not making rock better, you're just making Christianity worse." And that's such a line because that's exactly the risk we have in trying to compromise on tradition, compromise on orthodoxy to try to reach a bigger population. That is a risk. So those are the 5 advantages we have. Those are the 5 disadvantages. Let me go over them. Advantage 1, there's a disenchantment with liberalization of other Christian denominations. Advantage 2, there's an existential crisis that's a product of consumer culture. 3, there is a masculine aesthetic that exists alongside, obviously, femininity in the Orthodox Church that may be missing from more imbalanced mainline churches in America. 4th advantage, the internet. Huge advantage. You're watching this right now on the internet. I'm Orthodox. Hello. 5th advantage is, oh, I think I missed this one. I'll go over this one real quick. The 5th advantage is, here I'm going to be a little bit partisan. The Coptic Church does have some unique advantages when it comes to evangelization, and historically in America so far, the Coptic Church has made greater strides in evangelization in America than some of the other ones. And is that because, oh, like we're so great because I'm Coptic? Oh, not necessarily. I think a big reason why that is we've been around longest. Of the Orthodox churches, we've just been around for a longer time. And we're more established. And we have a good amount of numbers now. And on top of all of that, the Egyptian heritage is really the Western Heritage 1.0. It's Western Heritage Beta. What I mean by that is medieval Europe, which obviously became modern Europe. It's built on the foundations of classical antiquity. It's built off the foundations of the Greco-Roman legal legacy, Christianity, obviously, and all that comes with it. In Egypt, especially when it was Christianized in the first few centuries, was very Hellenic. Coptic uses all Greek letters. And there was a Library of Alexandria, and it had a very strong Aristotelian bent, and it's Hellenic. And if you don't know what Hellenic means, it just means Greek. You know, there's a lot of Greek undertones. And of course, there's Alexandria, named after Alexander the Great, a Greek conqueror. And so, since there is this strong Hellenism that exists till this day as the underpinnings of the Coptic Church, I think that creates a liturgical tone. It creates a sort of culture that is a bit more relatable to the average Westerner than you might find in some of the other traditions in or the other churches in the Orthodox communion. Okay. So to recap the disadvantages real quick. Number one, we have a strong ethnic encapsulation. This might be the biggest disadvantage. Number two, some of the Orthodox immigrants in America might feel threatened that they will lose their culture. That's bad. Third disadvantage is that immigration-driven growth is not evangelism. And we've had a lot of immigration-driven growth that doesn't necessarily translate in us gaining new converts. Fourth disadvantage is there's a lack of infrastructure for converts. I talked about the catechesis. I talked about priests having a bit of a lack of diversity in their ethnic background. Fifth disadvantage is really the risk of dilution or compromise on orthodoxy and tradition. Now, what's the path forward? One thing we could do to really help advance in this pursuit is we can have dual parish models. This already exists in a lot of, I can only speak for the Copts, but in a lot of Coptic churches, where there is an English liturgy in an English parish and an Arabic one. And there are churches, Coptic churches that I know, that are built from the bottom up with evangelism in mind, with evangelism in their DNA. And so this kind of solves the issue of the immigrants not feeling like they're threatened for losing their culture, because then they can just go to the heritage church, the one that does liturgy in their ethnic language, and they can, have their community, and it's fine. But then you also have the English churches that are more for second and third generation immigrants, people who were born in America, like myself, or for converts. This is already happening, and this is really smart, and we should keep doing that. Now, the second thing we could do to move forward is we need to have more, and this is also already happening, like we're actually kind of crushing and pumping, but we need to have more pan-Orthodox unity and visibility, where since there's a lot of different ethnic Orthodox now in America, we should start praying more together. We need to have liturgies that have Coptic people like myself, that have Armenian people, that have Malankara, Ethiopian, Eritrean, right? We need to have more pan-Orthodox meetings, pan-Orthodox communication, pan-Orthodox prayer, and it's been happening, which is great. It needs to keep happening, because then when someone looks from the outside in, they see, hey, look, there's a lot of ethnic diversity here. You got Egyptians, you got Syriacs, you got Ethiopians, Eritreans, you got Indians. And the Orthodox Church is already, like the Oriental Orthodox Communion is super diverse, even more diverse than the Eastern Orthodox Communion, because the Eastern Orthodox Communion is primarily comprised of places that exist in Eastern Europe. But the Oriental Orthodox, you got Sub-Saharan Africa, you got North Africa, and it makes a difference culturally. There's a big difference. And you have, of course, the Middle East with the Syriac Orthodox, and you got the Asians over in India, because Indians are Asians. So it's super diverse already. And so if someone from the outside looks in and sees, hey, look, there's a lot of diversity, I'm diverse, so I fit in here, then it helps. It helps a lot. Now, the issue with that, of course, is we're going to have to figure out who's the liturgy to pray, because there are some differences in the liturgies. Now, that's a conversation for another video, though. Now, the third thing we could do, besides having these pan-Orthodox liturgies and pan-Orthodox communication and having these dual parish models, another thing we could do is we can start raising up American priests. We can start, and this is going to happen. My nephew, for example, he's half Egyptian and half German. And so, this interracial mixing is already occurring. And as time goes on, if we can create that diversity in the priesthood that is a little bit of a lack today, like I said, as one of the disadvantages, that would help a lot in making people feel more welcome. Fourth thing we can do is just make it clear explicitly in our branding that this is Orthodoxy is for everyone, because a lot of people just don't even know that. They'll walk into a church and let's say it's I don't know, a Syriac Orthodox church, and everyone's Syriac, and they're like, hey, they won't even they won't even question it. They'll be like, hey, everyone here is Syriac. This is for Syriacs. I'm out. They might not know that they're even welcome. They might not know that Orthodoxy isn't ethnic. It's not for Syriacs. It's for you too. But no one told you that, so you just assume. So if we can just make it clear in our presentation that, hey, actually, we're not just for people of a certain ethnicity. We're for everyone, because Christianity is for everyone, obviously. The truth is for everyone, obviously. Then that would help. Now, the fourth thing we could do moving forward is to take an intermission for me to drink this sip of coffee. 1 second. Is we can kind of go ahead and position ourselves as what we really are, which is unchanging Christianity as it existed from the foundation of Christianity itself, that has a spiritual root, that has that depth that's missing in a lot of the mainstream Christian churches of today. And to wrap this up, nowadays, a lot of people converting to Orthodoxy are doing so for doctrinal reasons. They're theological nerds. They're theology nerds. They go and they read and they learn about diaphysitism and miaphysitism and Christology and Chalcedon, and they learn about the Trinity, and then they kind of go ahead and they decide, oh, look, miaphysitism is actually true. Surprise. And so they're like, oh, well, now that means I have to be Oriental Orthodox because it's true. Yeah, okay, that's good. And that's the way it's kind of been lately, because people who have that interest in theology and that interest in truth are going out and they're seeking and they're figuring that out. But that's not your average person. Your average person is not a theology nerd. Your average person doesn't really know that much about theology. And so for that guy, which is most people, it's really important that we create a culture of belonging and we make them feel welcomed and we don't make them feel ostracized, right? Because most people are not going to make some doctrinal decision and then go to where they discovered the true church is, regardless of all of these ethnic considerations. You know, nowadays, some people are doing that, which is great. But most people are not going to do that. And if we remain with our ethnic nostalgia and we think about, oh, the motherland from wherever that ethnic group came from, what would end up happening is you're going to start alienating the second, third, fourth generation immigrants like myself, someone who's born in America, who has an American upbringing. And you're going to then have an aging population and of immigrants. And then, of course, as the next generations go on, Orthodoxy is going to shrink. This is already happening with the Eastern Orthodox. The Eastern Orthodox in the past decade, their churches have been declining. Now, there's a little bit of a bump post-COVID, like I mentioned, especially with young men, but overall, it's still been in decline. And while Oriental Orthodoxy has not been in decline, its rapid growth and expansion has mostly just been a consequence of immigration. And so that's not really going to work long term when it comes to making America Orthodox. And so what we really need to do is we need to step into the milieu, the chaotic milieu of American Christianity with all of its hundreds of Christian denominations, mostly as a consequence of Protestantism, of course. And we need to demonstrate Orthodoxy as being united, because we are. And we, like, already, I went to my Coptic liturgy this morning. There were non-Coptic people there. Sometimes I see Armenians, sometimes I see Ethiopians, etc. And we need to keep doing that. We need to demonstrate hospitality. And besides hospitality, we need to keep a fidelity of our tradition.